Ladies and gentlemen, greetings and hello. This video comes to you in honor of a creator jam, which I did just barely leave, because what I like to do for Resonite is making videos. That's what I can just create the most easily. And this particular creator jam is kind of a fun one, because we're prototyping out a map that a university is going to be using to work with Resonite and Unity together. And I thought what I wanted to do for this jam, for the people in that university, but then also for anybody who's more practiced in Unity than they are in Resonite, a little bit of a primer on what some of the systems are inside of Resonite, how they roughly relate to what's going on inside of Unity. So if you're familiar with Unity and you have curiosities about getting into Resonite, this is a simple primer about how some of the systems are in Resonite. Let's just kind of get to it. Unfortunately, my laser's not working right now with the camera that I have. I'm so sorry. We just gotta roll with it real quick. This is the dev tooltip. I promise there's a laser connecting to it. And before I'm even going to equip it, everyone's going to tell you to equip your dev tooltip. Let's give it a second here, because you can think of Resonite as first-person Unity. It's not 100% correct. It's a little bit wrong. It's missing the point a little bit, but it's also kind of right. That's kind of generally the idea. So when you have your dev tip equipped, it's a little bit more like equipping your cursor or entering editing mode, because Resonite is a VR platform primarily. It does have a desktop mode, but it's a world that you inhabit, that you build inside of, and that can be kind of confusing a little bit. For me, it helps to imagine when you have the dev tooltip equipped and the flux tip, which we'll get to in a second, that you're in editing mode. Thinking of Resonite in separate modes helps me a lot. So when you have the dev tooltip equipped, this is most like when you're inside of Unity and you're clicking around on things to open up inspector windows, things like that, to see how the world is operating. That's the dev tooltip. You equip that, and for me, that's kind of entering into a bit of a separate mode, a different mental headspace. That difference helps me a lot. That's what the dev tooltip is. As far as controls in Resonite very swiftly, you're going to be hearing primary and secondary most of the time. And primary is your little trigger, and then secondary, for the most part, for most controllers, is going to be click in on the thumbstick. When you have the dev tip equipped, using your secondary input, which is clicking in on the controller, is how you select an object in the world. That's going to just be equivalent to inside of Unity when you click the mouse to click on a game object. That's what it's talking about. Equip your dev tooltip secondary, and that highlights or selects an object, which in Unity, that's as simple as like your mouse click. That's what that is. The other thing you're going to be hearing a ton is inspector window. Inspector window this, inspector window that. So when you have your dev tip equipped and something is selected in the world, context menu, which is one of the surface buttons on your controller, context menu, open inspector. And that pulls up an inspector window on the thing that you've highlighted earlier. This inspector window is your Unity inspector window. Unity has like an inspector panel, I suppose. It's just off to the side, the sidebar, that's your inspector, where you have a game object selected, and then this is all of the information that goes inside of the game object. That's your inspector window. It's one object in the world you've selected, and you've applied loads of modifiers to it. That's the inspector window. Anytime you open an inspector window on a game object, which you've highlighted using the dev tooltip and your secondary input, all of these things in here are individual components. You attach component. Clicking on this pulls up a little list of all of the available components. We'll get to this in a second. And through these customizations, by adding all of these different components, you're turning out different objects. You've got the mesh renderer, the box collider, the joint for this is like a door that you can just open and whatever. And to do that, that's the component called joint, and then it's got all of the options for joint. Just like you would in Unity, you have a game object that you modify to do different things. These are components, and that's what you do inside of the inspector. That's what the inspector window is. These are game objects you're manipulating. It's not that big of a deal. In Unity, hierarchy has its own panel for the most part, and that's just all in the same inspector window. The hierarchy is off to the left. You've got buttons to navigate it. Usually it's these two buttons up on the top. You can't see it with my laser. I'm so sorry. But this is how you can navigate the hierarchy. When you go up to the world root, you've got all sorts of things. You're going to notice this. That's your object hierarchy. Every Resonite inspector window has the object hierarchy window. And then you can select different objects inside of here. Super simple, super easy breezy. You're opening up this in the inspector window to find out what this image does. That's how you manipulate things inside of Resonite. Quick note here, as far as spawning in objects, there's in-game tools you can do. There's like the shape tool that can do that. A lot of people are going to use just the dev tool for that. You open up your context menu and there's a create new session here. And the context menu is usually what you would call kind of like a right click where you pull it up, you get little quick options. That's your context menu. Different items that you have equipped are going to have different options inside of the context menu. So as far as opening up into your context menu, you would angle up into create new, which unfortunately that's just the laser's not working. And that's just going to be your menu. You pull up your 3D model, box, capsule, whatever you want. Scale things down on the fly. That's not like a super helpful demonstration whatsoever. The big thing just important to know now is you can make things using the Dev Tooltip. Dev Tooltip is how you modify things in Resonite. This is like developer mode. That's all I'm going to say as far as the primer for this. Although I did forget a little note on terminology. I don't know if what Unity calls it, because I don't have a ton of Unity experience myself. I do have about 200 hours in Resonite, but not a lot of time in Unity. These are slots. Off in the left, we call these slots most of the time. I don't know what they're called in Unity, but any one of these things off in the hierarchy have slots, but then they have parents, children, standard stuff, but these are all slots, so you're going to make an empty slot, attach components to make it do whatever, and that's your like game object answer, stuff like that. Now, I'm just going to give you a hot primer on the other primary element to Resonite you're going to be hearing a lot. It's the protoflux, so you need the protoflux tooltip in order to handle the protoflux, which is the node system, the node-based programming language inside of Resonite that you're going to be hearing about a lot. So context menu, and then you can pull up browse nodes, which brings up this little node browser menu to give you a selection of like what all the nodes are inside of Resonite. I'm just going to unequip this for now. I don't need it for the sake of like, we got to talk for a sec. If you're not familiar, as most people are not familiar, it sounds a little bit scary about like protoflux, the node-based language inside of Resonite. How does that work? It just sounds like, I don't even know what it sounds like at this point. But here's the thing. Resonite is built in C#. The programming language inside of Resonite that we all handle in 3 dimensions is protoflux. It's also built on C#. Here's a fun little secret. Protoflux is to C# as Visual Basic is to Basic. When we're handling nodes and building code out in 3 dimensions, all we're really doing is programming in C# with extra steps. People will get mad at me for saying that. It's not completely right, but that's generally kind of the spirit of things. And earlier we had all those components I was talking about, which customize the game objects. Components kind of handle a little bit like functions. Because you attach a component to a game object, a component does a very specific set of things that you can interact with. You can view components a little bit like a function that has your different ways that you can interact with it to modify the game object. And if there's not a component that does what you want it to do, you can build out that same system using protoflux. You pack that into a game object. It's a little bit like, so you can do anything that you need. And in Unity, you have scripting in C#. You can do anything that you need if you know how to do C#. If you know protoflux, you can do anything that you need. In favor of viewing protoflux programmatically, you can think about anything inside of this node browser as imports. If we want a simple if node, that's going to be under flow. So you double click into flow, you pull out your if. So that puts if inside of my protoflux tip. And so now, if I just double click on my primary button, that spawns out my little if node. If I was programming in C#, how I would be able to say this is using. I don't have a lot of C# experience, so just bear with me. I might be getting a little bit of this wrong, but actually, no, I'm not. I have this is pretty much what you're doing. So using flow. If. I forgot the exact language. Mostly I know Python, which would be from using import if. That's what you're doing, and I spawned out if. It's the 3-dimensional code I handle around, but that's what I'm doing. Using flow import if. I'm so sorry I don't know your language. I'm just doing the best that I can to build a little primer because not many of these exist. And then I decided to build out a more busy Flux node so you can just get a quick handle on it. We've got loads of colors, loads of options. This is one Flux node that handles Twitch message events. If you hook up a Twitch account, then you can do tons of fun things whenever you get a message. You can pull out these colors by using your primary input button, and then you use your secondary input button to pull out more information. It spawns a little node. This is the color display, so I can find out quick little bits of information. Fun fact, most things inside of Unity, a lot of these things only fire for 1 frame because you're building out code. It's physical, but this is just a block of code. Any function that you make in Flux is a block of code that executes for 1 frame. Basically, it's an instantaneous thing. So I wouldn't see anything right now if this executed, but let's pull out something else and you can see it. And then I just really barely went on a big whole thing trying to figure out how to demonstrate this better. I realized I'm just out of time. This is just meant to be a primer. But that's generally the idea of how to manipulate Flux, which again is generally speaking kind of like building out little bits of lines of code in C#. You're just doing it physically. And then I do not remember where I just barely was. I crashed, and you'll get used to that in Resonite. I am so sorry. It's still in development, and they are doing the best that they can. But I remembered I am out of time, and there's just a few other things I wanted to run by as far as making Resonite a little bit more friendly for someone new. Importing things into Resonite is pretty friendly. You can drag and drop a file directly into the Resonite window if you're on desktop. Or if you're in VR, you can copy something like a YouTube link or a Resonite link if you find one in the wild. And on your dashboard, there's an option that says paste from clipboard, and that immediately will spawn out a YouTube video, or a Resonite link is specific in-house massive strings that point to very specific objects in Resonite. You can export something as a Resonite link, and then you would use that to import from clipboard, and that's how you can spawn very specific objects in. And you can do that with images, things like that. It has a desktop mode and also a VR mode. I know people who only have used the desktop mode. It's 100% fine. Again, you can think of Resonite as first-person Unity a little bit, and Unity has a desktop mode. It's only desktop. You can use Resonite in desktop mode. That is totally fine. And then the last thing I want to touch on for this quick little primer is it seems like Resonite's not very active. It's a little bit true. In 1 month, at the moment, it gets about 10,000 unique visitors, and any one point, there's usually going to be about no more than 200, maybe 300 people online. I think I've seen 350 before. It's not a remarkably popular platform all of the time. There's not a ton of public events all of the time. If you know where to go, what times to show up, then you can socialize in larger groups. But as far as using it as a development platform, it's fine. A lot of people are using it as a development platform, so if it seems like there's not a lot of people inside of Resonite, it's possibly because a lot of other people are also just using it like first-person Unity. You don't always want to do Unity work multiplayer, but you absolutely can. Case in point, Spobe, you want to pop on frame right now? My friend Spobe happened to come out into this world because I was in a public world when I was filming this quick little primer. Spobe showed up. It's like, hey, what's going on? I said, oh, I'm filming in a little primer for a video. So I am now engaging in first-person Unity multiplayer, and I'm not making anything inside of Unity. I'm using it as a film studio right now, but that's building something inside of Resonite, which is first-person Unity, but because it's also inside of VR, you've got a million different options. I recommend doing things in public worlds. Yeah, you would think it's going to interfere with my Unity build, but it's inherently social and it's multiplayer first-person Unity. I recommend coming into it with an open eye. There's so much to learn and see, and you can learn from the people, because unfortunately Resonite's small enough that tribal knowledge is a huge problem. If you know a guy who knows a guy who can tell you stuff, because the wiki's not all the way filled out because it's a new project, it's a small town, there's not that many people right now. So playing socially to learn more about the systems involved is really important. And it's first-person multiplayer Unity. It's really cool, and this has just been a quick little primer guide on it. I hope that you enjoyed, and good luck with everything you've got going on.